The Shuricones take everything you like about the Mazur setup, but just make it better. It's Shuricone time. I know some of you guys were waiting for this video, so here we are. We are going to be talking about the Shuricones by Kafatek. So these are the in-house design from Kafatek. Finally, after years and years, we finally have a conical burr designed in-house, and they, of course, kind of look like shurikens, ninja stars. And I want to spend a bit of time today discussing the Shuricones, the MC4. How do the Shuricones differ to something like the stock MC4 Mazur 186C burrs, as well as where does the MC4 now kind of stand in the Kafatek lineup and in comparison to other grinders? I guess we can't even call this an MC4 now. This is an MC5. So there are a lot of things to kind of unpack here. Let's start off with the Shuricones. So the Shuricones are 71mm conicals. They are absolutely fantastic, and they are currently my favorite conical burr set. I just have not seen conical burrs do these things in cup before, and I really want to unpack that for you guys. So basically, a few months back, I had the gracious opportunity of testing the Shuricones, and I was actually sent 2 versions of the cones, and these are the production ones that I got, and they are in this beautiful alpha coating, this like gold coating. We got to talk a little bit about the MC4 before we get to the burrs. I know you're excited. I know a lot of folks were very interested in my opinions on the MC4. I kind of just didn't really use it for the past few months because basically what happened was I really got very deep into filter coffee. I had like a Bentwood next to this guy. I had my dad's Flat Max next to this, and I just was doing so much more filter brewing, and I'm brewing really light roasted coffee, and honestly, these Mazurs do not do a really great job in filter. And then when I was pulling espresso, I was like, oh man, there's just something about the LM burrs that these Mazurs just don't do it for me. And same thing with the Bentwood when we compare it to this. And I'm kind of in this minority here where I'm probably pushing this grinder a little too hard with the roast levels. To me, the MC4 for a very long time was like a conical version of the Lab Suite. But it was really only in kind of like one scenario, which is if you're pulling a lever style shot, 35, 45, 50 second long shot in that 6 to 9 bar world, you're getting an incredible espresso that is just massive body, really great clarity, really great flavor separation. But when you start to venture outside of those parameters, that's where you could push this grinder a little too hard, or really push these burrs a little too hard, and you would find your shot to kind of fall apart. So I'm really generalizing here is if you push flow rates too fast with conicals, you kind of seem to get a little bit of harshness in the finish, or like bitters, or just like it doesn't feel as clean or smooth as a flat burr, at least a really good flat burr grinder, if you were to push the same flow rates. And we're not going to get into nitty gritty on differences there, but basically if you do that, that's how you could tell the difference, especially when you go to the coarser grind sizes. And just for the styles of coffees I was drinking, I really just was like, I had the privilege of having multiple grinders. I'm like, I just want a better tasting cup. I'd pick the Flat Max, all right? There are a clear difference between this and the Flat Max, and we'll discuss that as well. Basically, the problem with this grinder was the burrs. I think that everything else in it's great. You're just always held back by the burrs somehow. And this is really where, this pancake setup here, this little pancake burr, brings in a solution, which is let's give you slightly more clarity. For example, I've used these burrs before in something like the Healer 106 Flux, and that kind of is very similar to the Niche Zero, these Mazurs. They're all like traditional conicals. They're great at pulling mediums, darks, medium lights even. If you put an MC4 next to a niche, the MC4 kind of just slaps the niche around when it comes to flavor separation, clarity, understanding of a flavor note, but it still retains a lot of these like traditional aspects of conicals that you really like. But there's still like a limit of what you can do, even with that solution there. This is the limiter. So now we got something even better, and that's the Shuricone. So let's talk about these Shuricones now. The Shuricones take everything you like about the Mazur setup, but just make it better. Regardless of what roast level you're drinking, regardless of what you're trying to do, these Shuricones are basically a better version of the Mazurs in every single way. I don't know if that upsets people, but that's my take on it. I had these side by side. I did blind testing. I had bunch of people try this out with me, and we just were like, wait a sec, this is so weird. What is happening here? Everything that we like about Mazers is just better. So let's explain. Let me kind of dig deep into this. So there are kind of like three things to really mention here, three categories of things: light roast drinking, dark roast drinking, because I know a lot of you guys knock me on not talking about dark roast at times, and then filter brewing. So let's start off with, what does this allow me to do now that these did not allow me to do? This allows me to now push flow rates much higher. I can do lighter roast coffees and get clarity. It's interesting. So you can push flow rates now quite a bit more. For example, if in some of these lever style shots, if you push flow rate at your ramp flow rates from like 2 mils and you went to 4, 5, 6 mils, these burrs can now handle. They can handle the turbo life. And it's interesting because it kind of really cleans up a lot of the harshness and finish, but you retain a lot of those familiar properties in cup, even when you push flow rates really, really high. So you can now get these lighter roast coffees in espressos in these longer ratios that extract really well, that taste really well extracted, that give you clarity, flavor separation, body, and really that syrupy texture and coating around your tongue that you really enjoy with the Mazers. You would like try these lighter roast coffees on this and you'd be like, oh, that doesn't taste good. I pretty much will say that try that same exact coffee again with the cones, you are probably going to enjoy it. That's kind of the biggest benefit with light roast coffee, is that suddenly we are able to get more. We're able to get more understanding of the coffee, and we're still retaining all of those enjoyable aspects there. Now let's talk about dark roast. Ooh, here is the biggest problem I have with dark roasted coffee is bitters. Generally, maybe because the coffee is incredibly burnt, charcoal, whatever. These really seem to clean up the finish there with the harshness and bitterness that you might find in a dark roast coffee. But what I want to really emphasize here is that for those of you who are drinking dark roasted coffees, there are things in dark roast coffees that I think everyone enjoys, which is sweetness, things like caramels, things like marshmallows, all of that. These turn that up a little bit more, and that's just because these are a clearer burr than this. But it cleans up the finish, which is kind of interesting. So now we're able to pull some of these medium darks, dark roasted coffees, pulling, syrup, super textured shots. You're tasting, you're like, whoa, this is super, super sweet, and it's caramels, and it's very tasty. But then it transitions into something that is clean, that the finish of it just doesn't have this harshness that you may have experienced with the Mazers, and generally speaking with lots of Conicals. I really like that the cones are opening up the flexibility of pulling a variety of coffees and roast levels and really bringing kind of this approachable conical flavor profile across the board, but you're not sacrificing in something like clarity here, or really understanding of the flavor note. These aren't giving you something like ultra precise, transparent view of a flavor note that's very, very deep. This is giving you an understanding of the flavor note, but rounding it out so you understand that, yes, there is some sort of flavor note going on here, but you're not getting to the point where it's so clear that it hurts you in any sort of way, because it's still a conical and it still brings in that traditional kind of mouthfeel to everything. I like this burr set because it does make these light roast coffees very palatable for folks. I mean, people who are drinking light roast coffees are like, yeah, this is just battery acid, or this coffee, my shot has like a harsh finish to it, things like that. You couldn't really pull those coffees as nicely on the Mazers, but now you can on the cones, and that's just like mind-blowing. Now let's quickly go over filter coffee. It's gonna be quick. Basically, these Mazers were very meh at filter. They just created a lot of fines, very traditional, big Mazers, not good usually for filter. The cones actually do improve things. The cones, I found that I was getting less fines, I was getting a slightly clearer cup, but because it's like very coat your tongue, big body, even in filter, it's very muddy. So you don't get super clear presentation of the flavor notes. You get a better understanding of the flavor notes, so I do think you can brew some of these lighter roast coffees and get away with it, depending on brew technique, of course. But I think I would not really use this grinder, even with the cones, as a filter grinder. I think it's much better at espresso. But you can try filter and see what you think about it. I think it's better than the Mazers. Now let's talk about the MC4 in the context, or MC5 now, in the context of the Kafatek lineup, as well as where do these cones stand relative to some other conical burrs, some flat burrs, and then we'll wrap up. This is like the type of question I get all the time is, hey Brian, I have a flat max, should I buy an MC4? Or hey Brian, I have an MC4, should I buy a flat max? And it was really hard for me to respond to these questions because I just really did not like these Mazers because I had the Mazer MC4 next to a flat max. So there was one thing that the flat max offered me that the MC4 could not offer me, and it was the flexibility of brewing anything I wanted. It is wild that the flat max LM is such a forgiving burr set. The fact that you can brew a variety of roast levels, a variety of brewing methods, and still get a great cup is awesome. And in my opinion, I think the Shuricones are basically a conical version of the LM burr set. I really just enjoy this direction that these Kafatek burrs are going, which is let's just make less bad coffee. Give us a burr set that is widely flexible, that has huge sweet spots, that gives us a really enjoyable cup. I like it that your hit rate is much more here. I can bring all these properties I enjoy of conical espresso to lighter roast coffees, to all these different roast levels now. These Shuricones are not trying to act like a flat burr. They're not trying to compromise on the properties that you like about a conical. They're just elevating those properties, and that's what makes these Shuricones so attractive. So in the context of the lineup, I think it's a really great choice to pick up an MC4, MC5, MC4 put the cones, or buy an MC5 with the cones, and buy a flat max and own both of them. So in my experience, the biggest difference between the Shuricones and the Shuricones are very silky. They're super smooth, they're clear, they're flats, right? And they also offer, at least the LM for me, and even coarse, is they offer like a pretty directed presentation of the notes, generally like in the center of my tongue. They're like here, it's just like, here is the flavor note. Whereas the MC4 and the cones offer a syrup texture. They give you that conically goodness. You get that really nice coating, and just, it makes espressos very enjoyable. So I think something like the flat max and the flat are different, wildly different when it comes to how do these present you the coffees, but they're very similar in the philosophy of let's just give you a really great cup and give us a very flexible, approachable flavor profile regardless of what we're doing. And I think for those of you who own the LM, you'll probably really appreciate the cones, or even people who own the SSW. I mean, I know a lot of people are doing SSW and they got the MC4 Mazers. That's a pretty different setup. But now it's like you can just have a great cup across the board. It really depends on how you want the mouthfeel to be. How do you want the presentation of notes to be? You know, sometimes you want to have a more blended and more textury cup versus a silky cup, and that's why we own both grinders. I also do want to mention is I think the MC4 still has the best workflow out of all the Kafatek grinders. You just put the beans in, you have a great time. With a flat max, I still have to RDT. This, I just pour the beans in and it works. If you are drinking filter coffee, I think the flat max is just a no-brainer at that point. I know there are so many folks who are doing espressos, who are doing milk-based drinks. This is going to shine a lot, and it now gives you the ability to pull light roast coffees. So you basically can pick and choose now which style of presentation do you want. And this makes the lineup so much more appealing now. So I think that's really where I think the cones stand in the lineup. So now let's kind of talk about where did the Shuricones land in the context of everything, or what else should we be aware of? What's similar to this? What is a great burr set or grinder to pair with an MC4 for this? So let's talk about just conicals first, and then we'll talk about flats, because we can talk about flats. Ooh. Let's talk about the two conical burrs I have the most familiarity with, which is Lagom Mini Moonshine type of deal, and then the Niche Zero Mazer Coney type of deal. Cones, destroy those when it comes to espressos. You are just getting a much more complex espresso, much clearer espresso, really similar mouthfeel, all these things that we really like about it. I do think that the Niche still has like maybe slightly more body, but maybe it's because I just don't get any sort of clarity in that grinder, and this is just making me think that the Niche has more body at times. But but I think it's just generally, I would pick these over the niche Laga Mini regardless of what roast level you're doing. These just have a much better finish. The finish on these and the espressos is just something that you're like, whoa, I'm drinking a conical, I get that texture. And then usually it feels like with some of these conicals, you're like, okay, I get all this good stuff, and then now I'm waiting for the slight harshness or slight, like, not super silky finish. This doesn't have that, and that happens 100% for me with the niche Laga Mini, where the Laga Mini and these smaller conicals, like basically, you know, hand grinder conicals, do actually kind of beat these is in filter brewing. So now let's also discuss the cones against flats. The cones now are very similar to something like the SSP Cast Lab Suite, the version 2 to be specific, in the 64mm size. These to me are very similar to that, but they offer just like more texture. It depends on obviously how you dial things in, and honestly, I really wouldn't pick one burr set over the other. The biggest advantage of the cones is the fact that you can put it in a grinder like the MC4 and just have a significantly better workflow than any grinder that can fit the 64mm cast in it. But I do think that the 64mm cast pull ahead than these in something like filter brewing, but in espresso, I think what is cool about this is we get kind of similar flavor presentations of, okay, this is great, big body, but I think this is more enjoyable. You're getting, I think, equivalent amounts of clarity here, but this gives you that kind of conical edge, which is like, let's just kind of give you that texture and syrup. Whereas the cast, depending on how you dial, you can get like more of acid, depends on really what you're going for, of course. But I do think that the cones are on par with the cast, but they offer a more enjoyable cup. But if you're doing filter brewing, pick cast. Aside from that, the cones destroy idle mills. The cones destroy Eureka 55. I have like a Mignon here, and this thing just like slaps that out of the park, especially just because, again, think about workflow. Think about flat workflow versus this. This is like kind of also something that you should value as well, is how hard is it to use the grinder? This is very easy. Another thing that we should mention is now like pairings of grinders. So obviously the best pairing in my opinion is you buy a Flat Max and you buy an MC4, MC5, you call it a day. You're done. You then have a room to play with the Flat Max. You can put whatever burr set you want in it. This is too similar to SSP Cast, so if you already own SSP Cast and maybe you just wanted to like switch to a conical with more body and more texture, then this would be a great option. What I think this pairs really well with is you get another grinder, 64, maybe 98, that is really great at filter brewing or really great at offering you a more like super modern espresso. A burr set that gives you just essentially a completely different experience. So SSP MP, 64mm SSP MP is a great one to pair with this. 98 Brew, 98 HU, these are all fantastic burrs to pair with a cone. Those would be kind of the burrs I would pair this with. I mean, you know, go for something all-rounder that does everything really great, and then go for something specialist. I've been saying this for a very long time now. This would be the grinder that I would just use for all my milk-based drinks. I think most of you guys are probably using this for espresso anyway, so this would most likely maybe be your only grinder. But if it was your only grinder, I think the cones offer such a great possibility now. It just lets you try these coffees that you just weren't able to brew as well with the Mazers. You can now do it with the cones, and they are tasting fantastic. So I really want to wrap up now. The cones are awesome. They are, in my opinion, the best conical out there. They take everything we like about conicals, and we can retain these things across the board of roast levels, and we don't lose out when we try to brew certain roast levels. We don't lose out when we try to push flow rate very high. And we now get a lot of the approachability and huge sweet spot in things like the Shurikones. We see that now in a conical burr set, and it is awesome. So I really want to thank Denis and the team at Kafatek for sending me a set of Shurikones. I think anyone who gets these burrs is going to have a fantastic time. These burrs are awesome, and I really want to thank you guys for spending the time to watch this video and be super excited about the Shurikones. These burrs are now getting out to people. You guys are going to put them in your grinders, and you guys are going to have an awesome time. So thank you so much for spending the time to watch this video. I'll see you guys around.